David Bailey, thank you very much for the offer to have me email you a JPEG for 1 Bitcoin. I'm not offended or angry, but obviously you have no idea who I am if you think I'd be a part of one of your schemes. 1 Bitcoin, of course, would be very helpful to Matex, but at what cost? I'm not going to enable you and your buddies to claim you have an official Matex ordinal. I'm not going to give you the right to feel like you own a part of my soul. It's worth much more than 1 Bitcoin. And you're not doing this because you want to preserve Matex on the time chain. You're doing this because you want to scam a greater fool. There will never be a Matex NFT, no matter what you call it. I believe in physical work, and I believe that my proof of work will provide far more than your dirty money. And a lot of you are saying I should take the Bitcoin. And that's why no one will remember your name. So David, if you want to support Matex, you can buy a painting.
NFTs have come to the Bitcoin blockchain in a big way, and not everybody is happy about it. It's an evolution that has at times challenged the feasibility financially of running regular transactions and is consuming a larger and larger percentage of the finite amount of block space available for everyone. It's something that bubbled up over the winter when Matex, who was on our show back in January, was offered 1 whole Bitcoin to turn a piece of his art into an NFT and turned it down, which created a flashbulb moment for a larger conversation around Bitcoin as a technology and what is Bitcoin meant to be used for? And is it okay to believe that Bitcoin, above all other things, is a technology that is designed to solve the global problem of broken money that is affecting all of us? Our guest this week is joining me to tackle this nuanced and in some ways very complicated conversation, and in other ways not complicated at all. Rob Wallace is the co-founder of BitcoinNews.com, which is a Bitcoin-only online news agency, and we are going for a spin around the intrinsic moral dilemma that comes with trying to use the Bitcoin blockchain for things other than fixing the global problem of money. I'm Scott Dedels. I'm the CEO and founder of Block Rewards. Part of our mission in bringing Bitcoin to the workplace is helping people understand how it will help them. So if you're interested to learn something about NFTs on the Bitcoin blockchain and the problems and trade-offs that come with it, stick around. This one is a ripper. Welcome to another episode of the Block Reward podcast. We're joined this week by Rob Wallace from Bitcoin News for a very special conversation about a ongoing and sort of hotly debated topic in the Bitcoin space. We're going to be talking about Ordinals. Welcome, Rob.
Hello.
Thanks for coming on. This is a nuanced subject with a lot of different moving pieces. And so I'm really glad to have someone with your expertise to help our listeners sort of walk through the ins and outs of a complicated debate. And maybe before we go there, if we could just start, tell us a little bit about yourself and your Bitcoin journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Rob Wallace. I'm a co-founder of Bitcoin News, BitcoinNews.com. We provide editorial and different media, of course, revolving around Bitcoin. We've been running this company for a little over a year now. Yeah, I'm glad to have the opportunity to discuss this topic about ordinals and what is going on Bitcoin right now. And thank you for having me on.
Before we get into ordinals, the question I ask every week, but this week I think it's particularly relevant because conversation around ordinals is a reflection of a person's perspective on Bitcoin and what Bitcoin is and what it's for. So we ask this question every week. In your own words, Rob, what is Bitcoin?
Bitcoin, to me, is the opportunity to separate money from state. Since they closed the gold window in 1971, we've seen governments be able to rack up the largest debts in the history of the world, right? America is facing $34 trillion worth of national debt. And they've been able to do that because they have a money printer and say that they will pay it back later. However, if we are on a Bitcoin standard, and that is the monetary basis of the world, then getting into such debt and stealing the purchasing power of citizens will no longer be possible, or at least not nearly as easy. And that's what I hope that we are able to achieve here with Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think I'm always interested. A lot of our listenership is American and a lot of our guests are as well. I'm Canadian. It's fascinating because so the US has a debt problem, but they also have the privilege of enjoying the status as the global reserve currency, which does insulate you guys a little bit from the money printing. We're up here in Canada and it's $8 for a head of lettuce. And it's there are this debt experiment that started in 1971 with the anti-gold standard is playing out at various speeds. And we talked about this a little bit in the Peruvian Bull episode happened in January. I'm about Japan because Japan is another country with a great economy and has racked up piles of debt, and they are sort of in a currency free fall right now. So that this is a problem that's truly affecting everybody all over the world at different rates. And I guess that's just for some context because we are in alignment and agreement that this is what Bitcoin is for. Bitcoin is fixing the money. It's a problem that is already making things tough for everyone. And the compounding nature of the cost of servicing debt accelerates over time as debt gets bigger. And that has a direct relationship with an inverse relationship with what we can expect the purchasing power of the money in any country, whatever country you're living in. It's going to get worse. So this is the problem of our time, and Bitcoin is the fix for this problem. And this is where I think that maybe as a disclaimer, I think before we get too far into this conversation, Rob and I have talked offline about this topic a number of times because I don't want to say it's polarizing, but there are different opinions about what's going on with Ordinals. And it is a charged topic for the reasons that we're going to talk about in the episode today. We're recording this live and we are going to do our best to do justice to the subject and the nuances around the topic to hopefully create an interesting conversation that people who aren't following the space hyper closely can follow. So that's the goal of what we're trying to do today. Maybe we can just start, Rob, with what is an ordinal?
So the ordinal theory was released in early 2023 by a developer named Casey Rodarmor. And it is essentially an external numbering scheme for Satoshis. The way that Bitcoin works, you send a transaction, right? And it's a UTXO, an unspent transaction output. That gets sent to someone. When they receive it, they get a new UTXO. So there are no individual sats, right? A sat is a measuring stick. It's like saying a kilometer. There is no individual kilometer out there. It's a way to measure something. So there are individual UTXOs, but there are not individual Satoshis. But this ordinal theory tries to give an external numbering scheme to each Satoshi based on first in, first out. So the Genesis block mined by Satoshi, those are quote unquote the first sats, right? So if you are able to number these sats, you are able to assign a value to them, right? The earlier they are, the quote unquote more valuable they are. But again, the Bitcoin protocol does not recognize this, right? This is completely, in the words of Casey Rodarmor, it's pretend. You have to use a separate protocol to view these numbers and to track these ordinal numbers. And that leads us into inscriptions. So while ordinals might be made up, inscriptions do have an actual effect on the Bitcoin protocol and blockchain. So by tracking these sats, you can assign arbitrary data into transactions, right? And so people are putting JPEGs, some people are putting videos onto the Bitcoin blockchain. So these inscriptions are Bitcoin NFTs. And instead of on other protocols like Ethereum, if you have an NFT, you're buying essentially a hash, and that points to a centralized server where the picture lives. However, with these inscriptions, you've got the data that is actually living on the Bitcoin blockchain.
So for people who would be wondering, okay, so it's, it's externally, it's a system that imposes additional data and other stuff, digital collectibles. It enables that in Bitcoin. And maybe to frame it, Ordinals have created sort of a new avenue for people to get involved with Bitcoin that has nothing to do with money. And there is a disagreement around, which we're going to weigh in on, as to the validity of this new avenue into Bitcoin and sort of a bigger conversation around whether or not people who really view Bitcoin as being most importantly, above all other things, a technology for fixing money, how we should consider that position when we're thinking about Bitcoin and the attitudes of what Bitcoin's for. Would you say that's about everything, right?
Yeah, I think we're on track.
Cool. Okay, so there is an inscription. Satoshi himself did inscribe this chancellor on the brink in the first line of the Genesis block. So this kind of does go back to the start, and this is kind of an argument around, one of the arguments, I guess, around why ordinals belong.
Yeah, so Satoshi did put a hash onto the Genesis block. There's a chancellor on the brink, right? And it's a headline from The Times, a English newspaper, on January 3rd, 2009. And the reason he did that, well, one, adding arbitrary data into the header there adds entropy, which is necessary for mining. But the real reason he did it was to prove that there was no pre-mine, right? That was the beginning, that was the first block, and that he did not have any Bitcoin that he mined previously hidden away. So, and Satoshi did not go on and try to sell this inscription for something more than what one sat was worth, right? And I think that's the big difference here.
Yeah, maybe I think there's 2 points that are worth talking about. You use the term pre-mine, which I'm not sure has come up on the show yet before. And so a pre-mine is when someone creates a currency and the first thing they do is allocate a stash to themselves. This is part of the sort of intrinsic moral hazard that comes with cryptocurrencies outside of Bitcoin, because whoever's involved in creating it, typically this is how they make money on it, right? Is that they've first set aside a little pile for themselves. Hopefully when the project launches, the value of that pile goes up. And this is how people get scammed in crypto pump and dump schemes. But to come back to your other point there, you mentioned that Satoshi didn't do this because he intended to sell it. And this is part of the issue with ordinals in general. Is it's the idea of creating something on Bitcoin that is worth more than Bitcoin itself. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, Bitcoin is based on the idea that sats are fungible, right? That one sat is equal to another sat. Once you start assigning different values to different Satoshis, then the idea of being able to censor or restrict the movement of certain sats comes up. And I think it sort of blows up the whole entire idea of Bitcoin itself being fungible. Sats are supposed to be equal to each other and not have one be more important than the other. This idea so ordinals actually aren't necessarily a new thing. In 2012 and 2013, the idea of colored coins came up. But over time, the idea was batted around and it eventually died because the idea of destroying the fungibility of Bitcoin was realized that this is more important than making one sat more valuable than the other.
Yeah, and I guess it's not a perfect example because there are coins that are worth more than other coins. But if you were thinking about actual, fiat money, if we had pennies in circulation that people were spending and not every penny was worth 1 cent, would be an issue for any money system. Right, this is an obvious problem. So the problem is potentially bigger than that because it's not just about the idea of having individual sats that might be identifiable and worth more than others. There are some other issues. Maybe you could walk us through what are the other potential things that people who aren't a fan of ordinals might be concerned about.
So, since ordinals and inscriptions add arbitrary data that are not necessarily just monetary transactions, it adds to the weight of the blocks on which they're included, right? And that when the network experiences more congestion due to these weightier blocks, the fees go up. And that is going to happen, of course, over the lifespan of Bitcoin. Fees will generally go up as adoption increases. However, you could argue that this has been a premature increase in fees, that the sending this arbitrary data on the Bitcoin blockchain has done things such as made on-fee transactions for everyone quite expensive, of course, but doing other things such as opening a Lightning channel has also become prohibitively expensive for people, say, in developing countries who are trying to get onto the Bitcoin network, but now are priced out. And one could say that is before we have reached a level of escape velocity in terms of adoption. So yes, this is something that is going to happen down the road, but the fact that it is happening now, before we have layer twos that can effectively service the world, it leads to the question of, are we using block space, this shared resource, appropriately?
Yeah, I love that term, shared resource, thinking about this open source protocol as being, something that is maintained and accessed by the community. And so there is, I think, a valid reason to think that people who want to interact with this thing bear some responsibility for thinking about how they can use it. So like just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And that's kind of like where this comes back to. Yeah, you make a really good point around the layer 2 solutions not being necessarily ready yet today to take on the transaction volume. Like there are people who are still using the base blockchain to do stuff, and that might not matter to people like us who live in countries where the money has been a little bit less bad than in other places, but Bitcoin adoption is higher in places where the money has been worse, typically, right? And so fee spikes have a meaningful impact in terms of people's ability to use Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, where the things they might be buying with it in countries, less developed countries, are less expensive.
Yeah. And I mean, the argument, of course, being for pro ordinals and pro inscriptions is that these are valid transactions, right? You cannot, this is supposed to be a censorship resistant protocol, and that if they are paying a transaction fee, then it has all the right in the world to be included in the next block. But why are these people willing to pay these high fees to get into the next block? Well, because they think that they can sell this arbitrary data for a greater amount than they paid to get it included, right? And some people argue that this is spamming the blockchain, right? And what is spam, right? Spam is in the eye of the beholder. To the person who is sending out the spam email, I mean, it is not spam. It's a business tactic. But for those who are receiving it, when you're receiving spam and when you're not, right? So the thing about these adding all this data onto the blockchain is that every single node needs to incorporate it into the blockchain. And so if you're trying to spin up a node and start one from scratch, it's going to take a whole lot longer when you've got pictures and videos and non-monetary transactions included onto the node. And if it becomes harder to start a node, to run a node, then you are risking the decentralization of Bitcoin, because it is foundational that nodes are simple, cheap, and easy to run so that they can be as decentralized as possible.
Hey. And this is, this is something that played out sort of over the block size wars, which was kind of like the first, I don't want to call it, civil war in Bitcoin, where there was a disagreement about the size of the block. So the block space in a Bitcoin block that gets mined roughly every 10 minutes is finite. So it's not an infinite thing. And we were talking about this in the John Ely episode about a month ago, where John had a really great point talking about how, the internet is an information network, and what the internet really enabled was an infinite amount of information to be moved on a planetary scale. And so what existed prior to Bitcoin on this information network is really infinite things. And so I think the spam email analogy is really great, because if you're sending spam email on the internet, you can send 1 million emails, and there's no cost to multiplying something infinitely on this information network that's really designed to do that. And spam, in this case, it's different in a finite environment where the amount of block space needs to be considered by everyone who wants to participate. They're not the same.
Yeah, and I mean, if people want to spend tens of thousands of sats to send one 500 sat transaction, I mean, by all means, go ahead and do it. It's the fact that everybody else who wants to run a node and keep the network decentralized has to download that data in order to start up a node. That really costs the network as a whole. And I mean, we've just crossed this year 500 gigabytes for the whole entire Bitcoin blockchain, right? So hardware is getting cheaper over time, but still, if we are growing the size of the blockchain exponentially, then it becomes harder and harder to easily run a node.
You use the word censorship, and I think you're like uniquely positioned person to talk about this since you operate in the news space. What is censorship?
Censorship is the suppression of speech from a centralized authority, right? It is someone who has control, whether through the monopoly of violence or the control of information, who says that some things are unacceptable and cannot be talked about. Are we trying to censor people's right to send data on the Bitcoin blockchain? No, but there are options and ways to sort of filter this information, right? And when you're doing that, you can say that it's resource management, right? It's your node. You can set the rules on your node. And if it reaches consensus on the network, then it is valid. So right now, are there enough people running filters on their nodes in order to stop this or suppress it at all? Absolutely not. But our role here is to sort of be a mutological response, right? The social layer of Bitcoin, where we discuss these things. And if we see that something is not necessarily cool for the long-term health of this protocol, it's up to us to sort of raise our hands and say, hey, what's going on here? Let's talk about this. Let's bring this up. Because when there are people with a lot of funding behind them pushing for these things, it's very easy to sort of just let it go through. But it's our job to sort of raise a question here and ask what's actually going on.
Yeah, and there are a couple different things going on there, I think, that are worth diving into. One is the difference between nodes and miners. So the miners who are validating the blocks, they do care about transaction fees because miners get paid in two ways. They get the block reward, which are the Bitcoin that are released every block as part of the predetermined issuance schedule. But then they are also paid, in the transaction fees. So when fees get higher, miners make more money. Mining is a notoriously difficult business. So there's, I say, maybe division among the miners as to whether or not, or maybe all miners think it's good. I don't know. I'm not a miner. I can't speak on their behalves, but that's kind of one thing I think that's going on. And two, NFTs and digital, ownership of digital things is a really big part of the use case story, I guess, for the rest of crypto. And I would say the rest of crypto. For crypto, Bitcoin is not crypto. And so the Ordinals business is booming, right? I think it's objectively fair to say the total dollar volumes of these things that are being exchanged right now is in the order of hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't know the exact number. Maybe you do. But I know it's significant.
Yeah, there's been a huge push in the last year with lots of companies raising seed rounds to try to push this agenda of putting arbitrary data on the Bitcoin blockchain and selling it as people say they're the true Bitcoin maximalists are the ones that want to have all these different crypto use cases come back to Bitcoin, right? That Bitcoin is the king head honcho that will be able to put all those rest of these cryptos to bed by being able to do everything else that they can do, whether it's these NFTs or smart contracts or whatever. And it's all going to return back to Bitcoin. And Pete Rizzo of Bitcoin Magazine, when he was on What Bitcoin Did with Peter McCormick, he was making the argument that Silicon Valley has spent $70 billion on crypto projects outside of Bitcoin over the last 3 years, developing all these different use cases for crypto. And that as a true Bitcoin maximalist, you should want all these things to come back to Bitcoin. Again, I think we need to think about what is Bitcoin, what is it for, and if it's to truly separate money from state, then we shouldn't necessarily be thinking about how to trade monkey pictures on the blockchain and just make sure that this protocol is decentralized and open to those who need it.
Yeah, and I think that part of the elegance of what makes Bitcoin unique and special is that it doesn't do a lot of stuff. Like this is part of the reason also why it's attack resistant, is that what it's recording is not all that complicated, and this is a feature. It's not a bug. If you were to think about how to go about designing the base layer of a planetary money system, you would probably want the base layer of it to be pretty simple. So what we're talking about here in part is the notion of, should we infinitely complicate and endlessly try to add features to the base layer of what this thing is meant to do.
In my opinion, we got to focus on the monetary aspects, right? And again, I mean, can we stop this? Probably not. But the real question here is, are we cool with it? You know, if it's Bitcoin culture is okay, now we're NFT bros too. I think that changes the mission and the North Star. And it's not why I'm here, right? And so, yeah, I think that this is going to go on. This will continue, but it's the general discourse regarding it and how new people coming onto the scene are onboarded and what they are taught about it from the get-go, whether this is some cool new feature that's going to raise adoption and make Bitcoin more useful, or it is just bloating the blockchain, making it harder to run a node, and is muddying the water in terms of what we're really trying to do here.
Yeah, man, it's a great point. And I think that's a great way to summarize why we wanted to have this conversation and do this episode, because it's this piece for people that are trying to get their heads around this massive subject that matters. And there are a lot of common arguments from crypto people or people who are outsiders to Bitcoin. You know, it's the same things all the time. The transactions per second is too slow, no smart contracts, these other things. And it's confusing. And it takes a long time for people to catch up to speed. You know, like I went through my own shitcoining phase, and there are some, don't Google that. It's out there. I can't do anything about it. But, you know, but that happens to most people. And it happens because of the way it is. And I think that, you know, again, we're in agreement. This is a really important, I would say this is the most important thing happening in the world right now. And what is important is that people who are being introduced or learning about Bitcoin understand the significance of what's at stake and what could potentially happen if Bitcoin is successful in, as you said, sort of separating governments from money printers, because this is the best hope we have for a brighter future for ourselves, for our kids, for the world we're going to be leaving behind. And so it is a lot more important than being able to potentially create a JPEG and sell it for a lot of money. It just is. So part of the reason for the confusion around this, and you mentioned Pete Rizzo from Bitcoin Magazine. Bitcoin Magazine has been very pro-ordinal. And they are, you know, there's sort of a couple aspects that we wanted to discuss that are, you know, objectively, I think, fair points to make. One is they are putting out content and using their brand to promote ordinal related dialogue and sort of normalize the conversation. And as part of that, they are gaslighting sort of what has been termed monetary maximalism. So people who used to be Bitcoin maximalists, that was when if you were Bitcoin only, Bitcoin's the only thing that matters. Now you're a monetary maximalist if you're only in Bitcoin to fix this problem of broken money for everyone. Now you're some kind of, you know, digital caveman rooted in these Stone Age ideas. You're not open to change, and you don't play well with others. So that's one half. And the other half is that they are using ordinals as a part of their business strategy. And this is reflected in some of the content that they're creating. And why I think this matters is Bitcoin Magazine has done a really great job producing great stuff. They have a great brand and a big following. And when this information is front and center among their other content, that adds to the confusion around the conversation. So that's my opinion. Rob, I kind of want to give it over to you, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about the Bitcoin Magazine, you know, like give us an overview.
Yeah. So Bitcoin Magazine is underneath BTC Inc. And BTC Inc., of course, runs a magazine. They do the conference, Bitcoin 2024 this year, as well as has other aspects such as UTXO management, which is their asset management arm. So they are a venture fund investing in different projects in the Web3 space, right? And so, I mean, again, Bitcoin Magazine has done amazing work. They create a beautiful print magazine that is the best in the space, of course. They put on a good conference. And I mean, the work that they've done, in fact, like championing the causes of Ross Ulbricht and Julian Assange, a few other large media outlets have done as much work in those, helping those people as much as they have. So they've definitely done some great things over the years. But what we've seen over the course of 2023 into 2024 is that they are opening the door to these projects, these ordinal projects, these layer twos that are questionable at best, especially when it comes to a Bitcoin only mission and saying that Bitcoin is the best and the rest of these coins protocols are inferior at best and scams at worst, right? So when you have a media outlet and you're also investing in projects, it's good to keep a clear line between the two. But as we've seen, some things are starting to get muddied a bit. So yeah, we can dive into that further if you like.
Hey, everybody. I'm thrilled to announce that Block Rewards has come on board as a sponsor for the 2024 Canadian Bitcoin Conference happening in Montreal, May 16th to the 18th. It's going to be a great event with an unreal lineup of speakers, and we couldn't be more excited about being involved. If you're thinking about going and you don't have your tickets yet, you get 10% off of your pass using the code BLOCK2024, and that's all capital letters. And you can get those tickets at CanadianBitcoinConf.com. Hope to see you there. You don't play man. And I think this is a really fair point to make. And it's part of the reason I think you're the right person to make it, because you are also in the Bitcoin news space. And I just personally believe that it's of value as we move from onboarding the next billion users of Bitcoin. We need great trustworthy places to go for people to get as much good information as possible. And it's part of the reason why I started the pod. And that doesn't mean that people aren't free to run their business however they want. But I do think that it does, if you make those choices, you're opening up yourself to a podcast like this, which is hopefully just presenting an alternative view. And I want to highlight an article to give the listeners maybe something specific for us to anchor around. We've been talking about and thinking about this conversation for a while. This is something that really has been bubbling up. Madex, who's a friend of the show and was on the show back in January, the clip that we aired before the episode, let's just talk about that for a second. So Madex was offered by David Bailey from Bitcoin Magazine 1 Bitcoin to mint a Madex JPEG NFT. And obviously you saw the clip. Madex is super. Any NFT. One of the things that Bitcoiners really believe in, I think, is proof of work. The whole episode we did with Madex was about producing real art in the real world and getting paid real money as a result of your real work. And this is very much part of the Bitcoin ethos, regardless of what you're doing. So I think that, on the art side, NFTs are, I would say, incompatible with the kind of Bitcoin mentality, because there is a provably less amount of work involved in creating an NFT than a sculpture or a painting that is physical. Back to the article. So this was April 15th. There was an opinion piece on Bitcoin Magazine's front page. The article's called Beyond Tribalism, the Synergistic Future of Bitcoin and Ethereum, and is written by a guy named Yves Leroux, who is, I think, an EOS developer, if I might have that wrong. We'll talk about that article in a second, but to give you the Coles notes, some of the points that were espoused in this article are the idea that Bitcoin has successfully become a store of value, but that's only what it does. The idea that proof of work as a consensus mechanism is maybe somehow bad. The idea that ordinals create sort of the opportunity for common ground between Bitcoiners and crypto bros, and that this is a good thing, and that Bitcoiners should be more accommodating of the rest of the people in the crypto world who, maybe they're trying to make the world a better place as well. They're just trying to enrich themselves in the process. And what's so bad about that? So we'll include some links in the show notes. You can find that article if you want to read it yourself. But that article, I think, is really just sort of the quintessential example of why we're having this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, the end of the article is all crypto communities should strive to shun the cutthroat behaviors of Web 2 was built on and find ways to collaborate. Once this is done, can Web 3 realize its full potential? As Biggie put it, can't we all just get along? Well, I mean, when times are good for these other coins and protocols. They're quick to say Bitcoin is boomer tech. It's old. It's slow. It has no use case for it. You can't buy things with it. So it's old. It's dead. Ignore it. Look at my shiny new thing, right? But as soon as Bitcoin rises to prominence again, they're quick to buddy up to it and try to create tribal ties between us. But I mean, we don't forget, we know what was said. And there's a reason why there's Ethereum and why there's Bitcoin, right? And I don't hate people who are Ethereum heads or whatever, but at the end of the day, again, we're talking about the social layer, the ideological layer of Bitcoin, and that needs to be protected. And as soon as you tie it into all these other things like yield farming and airdrops and NFTs, again, you're missing the mission of trying to fix the money here.
Yeah, and it's like, first of all, for our listeners, there is no synergistic future between Ethereum and Bitcoin. If you're following the price of Ethereum in Bitcoin, it's an exchange rate that has been falling like a rock steadily. So Ethereum peaked, I think, at 0.15 of a Bitcoin. The best exchange rate you could ever get between one Ethereum and one Bitcoin was 0.15. That number has steadily gone down to 0.05, and 0.05 was kind of like the battle line in the sand. And so this is like 20 Ethereum for one Bitcoin. And that line has held. So the Ethereum priced in Bitcoin chart, just like everything else in the world, is trending to zero over time. And the reason there is no synergistic future for Ethereum and Bitcoin is because Ethereum is the world's largest Ponzi scheme. Like the two could not be any more different. And Ethereum bros can say whatever they want about it, but the monetary policy of Ethereum changes whenever it's required to change. The total circulating supply and maximum supply of Ethereum changes on an as-needed basis. The rate of issuance, the deflation, however you want to call it, these are things that are experiencing a constant tinkering. So Ethereum, you could make the argument, it sort of takes all of the worst parts of fiat money, centralizes it even more in the hands of fewer people who have even more authority to make changes on the way it works. And it does work based on attracting new people with the promise of its price going up. And so it meets all the definitions of a Ponzi scheme. And so I think it's like, I don't know if you can make this point strongly enough that Bitcoin is not missing out on things by not having those traits. So part of what we're talking about here is whether or not Bitcoiners should be embarrassed about being proud to be on this mission of fixing the world. And, we're saying, no, this is something that it's difficult to understand what Bitcoin is doing and how it's doing it. But as part of doing that, you don't have much room to compromise, because even the opportunity to try and do what Bitcoin's doing is still filled with all kinds of uncertainty. This is going to be a very difficult mission, and should it be successful, we don't need to increase the degree of difficulty on supplanting the most entrenched institution that exists in the world today.
Yeah, and I mean, as a form of money that can change the world, I mean, we should expect attacks, right? And they might be full frontal or they might be subversive, but there are many different ways to try to demean Bitcoin, undermine it, and effectively change it for the worse in a way that is influenced by forces that might not be on the same mission as well, right? So I think it's our job again to be vigilant and to say, hey, we don't, this isn't cool. This is not what we signed up for, and it's our job to do so.
So maybe let's talk a little bit more about kind of that. You mentioned there's this umbrella organization, UTXO management, and there are some really egregious examples of rare sats and selling the Bitcoin logo. Could maybe just let's expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. So BTC Inc., of course, runs UTXO Management, and UTXO Management runs a website called Rare Inscriptions. Well, they sell rare inscriptions via the site Rare BTC. And the description of Rare BTC is a white glove service for collectors and high net worth investors looking for the rarest sats and inscriptions on the market. So right now on their website, they have listed ordinal inscription number 26, and it is the Bitcoin logo that they are selling for 12 Bitcoin, right? This is one sat that has that points to arbitrary data on the blockchain that is of the Bitcoin logo that they're trying to sell for over $750,000, right? And if that sort of sounds like a scam, or you're just trying to trick somebody out of their 12 Bitcoin, right? As we've seen with other NFT projects, these things can raise to ridiculous heights in terms of their valuation, but they come crashing back down just as fast. Just ask somebody who bought a Bored Ape in 2021 for hundreds of thousands of dollars and what they can get for it now. Very different market.
Totally. And that's just it. It's like, so the only reason you would pay 12 Bitcoin for something like that is if you had the belief that somebody else would pay more than 12 Bitcoin for in the future. And I think the nuanced part about this and why it matters is there are a finite amount of Bitcoin. So if you're trading a large number of Bitcoin for a single sat, we're all moving you're trading a fixed portion of something around. So it's a pretty significant gamble. I mean, if you're making that choice, that's fine. If you're using one of the largest brands in Bitcoin to promote this kind of activity, I think that's a totally different thing.
Yeah. And I mean, they say it themselves on the website. They say BTC Inc.'s established network within the Bitcoin community and its reputation for reliability play a crucial part in completing these sales. So yeah, I mean, they're leveraging their reputation in order to add legitimacy to the idea of selling the Bitcoin logo for 12 Bitcoin.
There's some other stuff too that I think is worth taking a stab at. One of them is Spice. What is Spice, Rob?
Spice. So UTXO Management, they were part of a $10 million seed round led by Castle Island Ventures. But they invested in this layer 2 protocol called BOB, Build on Bitcoin. It is supposed to be a first of its kind hybrid layer 2 powered by Bitcoin and Ethereum. So there you see it, right? I mean, you see the idea of trying to join these two things, Bitcoin and Ethereum, when they couldn't be any more different. But yes, this layer 2 protocol has you lock up your Bitcoin or your fiat or Ethereum, whatever. You send them things that are deemed to have value, and then you receive Spice, right? And of course, the idea is that you could sell this Spice for a greater value than what you received it for. But as of right now, citizens in America are geo-blocked from accessing the ability to get this Spice, probably because they think that Gary Gensler will deem it a security. So yeah, I mean, there's multiple layers here to dive into, but I mean, just the fact that UTXO Management is investing in a layer 2 that combines Bitcoin and Ethereum, like what's going on here?
Totally, man. And there's an argument that, and this is in that article about the synergistic future, that, Ethereum and Bitcoin have sort of this common lineage. And because of that, it's Bitcoiners' responsibility to welcome everyone else with open arms. And like I said, sort of help bring all of this other like innovation, air quotes for people who are just on audio, into the Bitcoin protocol and the Bitcoin community. And it's like, I don't know how else to say it. Like, I just think it's something that is, yeah.
Again, it's people who want to take your Bitcoin, accept your Bitcoin in exchange for something they say will have greater value in the future than the Bitcoin you gave them. But this has been proven time and time again to be a lie, right? I mean, the Yves LaRose guy who wrote the tribalism article about how Bitcoin and Ethereum these people should come together. I mean, he was a part of the EOS Foundation, and they are actually one of the largest Bitcoin holders in the world to this day, right? Because they took in over 160,000 Bitcoin in exchange for this EOS token that was a failure. And they were eventually prosecuted by the SEC. They settled out of court for, I think, $24 million, which is way less than the $4 billion that they took in order to fund their projects. But yeah, I mean, whether it's EOS token or a Bitcoin B logo inscription or this BOB spice, all of them want your Bitcoin in exchange for something else. Don't give up your Bitcoin.
Yeah, man. And thank you for that. You made that point a lot better than I made it when I was trying to make it a little while ago, where basically what these things are trying to do is get your Bitcoin in exchange for something that doesn't have any real value and won't hold its value over time. So it's not innocent. The Bitcoin is finite. Everything else is infinite, just like the infinite emails that were possible in the pre-Bitcoin information network of the internet.
That's it. I mean, that's the main point, right? These people who are running these programs and projects, they say that it's all about innovation and opening up to more adoption and getting Silicon Valley on board with Bitcoin. Bitcoin as a way to fix the money is going to be just fine. We don't need all these Rube Goldberg machines thrown on top of Bitcoin in order to try to make it more attractive to the general.
Yeah. I mean, it's a way to Ben Parent from BTC Sessions. His answer from what is Bitcoin is fiat is that the elites can print money. Crypto is everyone can print money, and Bitcoin is no one can print money. And what this essentially doing is trying to bring everyone can print money to Bitcoin, which just to make it as clear as possible, why these things have no place in Bitcoin, but also, this idea of why it's important to use your own words, to be vigilant and have some conviction around, if you think that this is fixing the money is what Bitcoin is for, then that's okay. It's not only that it's okay. This is actually what it's for.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of people who are proponents of ordinals and inscriptions, they will say, oh, you're a technical rube. You don't get it. You can't stop us. Bitcoin is censorship resistant. And they'll call you stupid or an idiot for trying to object to these things. But I mean, okay, I've admitted that, yeah, these things will probably go on and they will continue, and there will always be schemes to try to take your Bitcoin in exchange for something else. But at the end of the day, you got to decide which line of the sand you're on, right? Do you promote this? Are you investing in this? Are you making money off of these schemes to take your Bitcoin in exchange for something that is less valuable? That's up to the individual. But I think it's programs like this and raising your voice on platforms like Nostr or Bitcoin Twitter and saying what you think about it is extremely important.
Maybe just as a final thought, like there has been a lot of high profile weighing in on this thing on both sides. Bitcoin, the next conference, Nashville is coming up, and they said, to credit the good work that they have done, and as a result of that, there have been some really high profile people in the space come to Bitcoin Magazine's defense to say, this is fine, like everyone's overreacting. Maybe just give us a little bit of a flavor for the macro debate.
Yeah, I mean, it's been pretty loud. If you've been on Bitcoin Twitter, you'll definitely see it. But I mean, in the words of Adam Back, right? I think it's a good person to reference in terms of all of this. I mean, he says, we can recognize we can't really stop them, and it's a free world with anonymous miners. But we can also educate and encourage developers who care about Bitcoin's use case to either not do that or to do it in a prunable, space-efficient, for example, timestamp way. So, yeah, I mean, it's a free market. They're free to promote these things, but we're also free to come up and say, hey, that sort of looks like a scam, It walks like a scam. It talks like a scam. It might just be one.
I think that if you're, one thing you can do is choose where you get your news from. And I would say consider getting your Bitcoin news from Bitcoin News. And so I want to thank you for coming on the show, Rob, to, like I said, sort of tackle a conversation that I think is important and put it out there. So hopefully we have done a little bit of that. And for people who want to find you online, where can they do that?
BitcoinNews.com. Yeah, check out the website. We just rebranded it. It's looking nice and fresh. There you can click on the videos tab, takes you over to YouTube, where we've got Luke Mikic putting out like 3 videos a week there. We've got the newsletter you can sign up for, delivers every Monday morning, fresh to your inbox. And of course, you can find us on Twitter and Nostr, where we're putting up posts every single day. So yes, I appreciate you having me on here to tackle this complex topic, but one that needs to be talked about, and you're free to voice your mind, right? Like, just because some central authority within the Bitcoin space says that they think that this is cool, if you don't think so, you're free to say so. So go and do that.
Totally. And if you made it all the way to the end of the episode, I want to thank you for tuning in and following as well. And like, subscribe, come back next week for another episode of The Block Reward. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Block Reward. We're trying to do something different here, creating accessible conversations meant for people who aren't obsessed with Bitcoin. If you found this episode informative and engaging, hit that subscribe button to make sure you stay updated with future episodes. Your feedback matters. We'd greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to share your reviews and help us with our goal of creating Bitcoin content that is simple and easy to understand. Bitcoin has an important role to play in the future of finance. It will change the way we save, spend, and invest. Discover why Bitcoin offers a game-changing opportunity for forward-thinking employers by visiting blockrewards.ca. Block Rewards' mission is helping Canadian employers implement strategies for integrating Bitcoin into compensation and benefits, supercharge your recruitment and retention strategies, and help your team members plan for the rising cost of living by rewarding their work with the hardest money ever invented. Special thanks to our top sponsor, Paramount Employee Benefits Consulting, Canada's only Bitcoin forward benefits and pension advisory. For more information, find them at paramountbenefits.ca. Big shout out to Podigy, our production team that makes all this possible, and BMX Escape for producing our music. Bitcoin is an expansive and dense topic many people walk away from early. To Bitcoin enthusiasts looking for that podcast they can share with friends, family, and colleagues, one they'll actually listen to, we hope that is us. The content of these conversations is meant to be provided for information purposes only. Nothing here is investment advice. Bitcoin is a big topic. Be sure to do your own research before making any personal financial decisions. Thanks for listening.